Hey, good afternoon. My name is Derek Hanson. I'm here with Yubico, I'm here with Art, talking on behalf of Yubico of our story that we did together, deploying some solutions to solve authentication in wow. It's one of those days. Anybody else really tired after this week? Because I know that's where I'm at. All right, thank you. Let me start over. I'm here with Art, and Art is going to tell you all about hospitality and MFA and how we modernize and go forward. All right, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Derek. My name is Art Chernobrov. I work for Hyatt Hotels Corporation, and just wanted to spend a few minutes talking about some of the deployments we've done, how we've leveraged YubiKeys, both in front of house and back of house deployments at Hyatt.
Great. So let's start a little bit at the beginning. So, Art, what was your vision for authentication, and what were your needs for authentication in your business?
So, there's a couple challenges that we have in hospitality. One is, how do we secure our applications, but there's a visual concept to it too. And when a user comes out to try to MFA in, and let's say you're walking past the front desk at a hotel, what you don't want is that person buried, in their cell phone. Now, even though that person is, putting in an OTP or doing whatever, hitting approve, deny, whatever they're doing, if you're a guest just walking past the front desk, the visual that comes into your head is, they're on Facebook or they're on Instagram or they're doing something personal with that device. They're not, the immediate thought is, isn't that they're completing an MFA response. It's kind of like, I can't, like when you ever talk to someone like in just a hallway conversation at work or something, and they got an Apple Watch on and they just kind of go like this, and in the back of your mind that they're maybe like, looking at a notification or something, but visually you're like, I'm talking too much or something, and this guy's looking at his watch to see what time it is and where they can move on to something else. And those are the type of visuals that we're trying to avoid in a guest-facing role. And YubiKeys were kind of perfect for that.
Well, that's great, because I think when we talk about authentication, a lot of times it gets really easy to just focus on the security and what happens when the person authenticates. We're getting better now at talking about the user experience, but so many times that user experience is about the person that's actually authenticating. I think what you're highlighting, Art, is a great example of the user experience created by somebody authenticating from a customer lens. Like when you look at this picture, that's the image that I think that you were trying to avoid, is somebody not looking down and not engaging with the customer that's in front of there. So is there anything else that you observe in that picture that you wanted to make sure that wasn't part of the Hyatt story?
I think that's that's pretty much it, that we want to create the best guest experience that we can, and that's, you're looking the person in the face when you're talking to them, when you're checking them in, that you're not looking down at your phone, you're not looking down at your screen, and being able to use the YubiKeys have been great for that.
Great. Well, and I think that really highlights where we want to go next. So when we talk about the deployment that you have done, what we did with the solution with the YubiKeys was using FIDO-based multi-factor authentication. And so we took away the need to get that other device out to look at that would take your attention away from the customer. Can you tell us a little bit about that journey that Hyatt was on to get started with YubiKeys and your
Sure.
applications?
So one of the challenges that I think everybody probably in this room faces is, how do we get keys in people's hands? How do you get people comfortable with the cost? The cost associated, meaning like IT leadership. If you have, let's say you have 10,000 or 100,000 colleagues, and you want to buy each of them a key, that piece of paper that you put in front of them with how much that costs is daunting, and it's hard to prove out like that this is a value to your leadership to be able to pay that. And one of the things that we did at Hyatt to sort of cushion that blow, if you will, is try to absorb the deployment of the keys in other projects. So when you look at the slide here, and it talks about World at Hyatt, which is our loyalty guest loyalty application. When we roll that out, there's a lot of PII data in there, that when someone checks in, you get to see all their information, their World at Hyatt points, and that's kind of the apps that we wanted to secure. It's also very guest-facing, front of house-facing. So when we started rolling out this application to colleagues all over the world, we included the procurement of YubiKeys as part of the application deployment. And the best part of that is not everybody in our organization uses this application. Just like if you did another deployment, not every user uses application X, Y, or Z, but that YubiKey is now usable for all the other apps that colleague might access. So kind of through attrition, you start to carve out little pieces, and you leverage the YubiKeys in this app, then you have another deployment, and you can leverage them there. If you want to retrofit an existing app with a stronger form of authentication, you build it in there, and slowly over time, you start getting more and more keys into people's hands, and you don't have that one huge number of keys that you have to buy all at once, and you don't have a CISO or a CFO looking at a 7 or 8 figure number and grabbing their chest.
Yeah. Well, I think that's important, but I think it's also important to ask the question, what was the reaction from the users as you were rolling out this solution for this application?
So that was kind of neat. So when we, even before we rolled it out, we did some videos in one of our hotels, the Park Hyatt in Chicago, where we wanted to do training materials for colleagues on how to sign in. And we went over to the hotel, and we gave this first person, their YubiKey, and walked through the sign-in experience with them. And they thought it was the coolest thing ever. They were so used to having to put their password in everywhere and do all that. It was just incredibly well received. We never really looked at it from the lens of the average end user and how this would just impact their daily lives. They thought it was great to just be able to touch a key, put their PIN in, and go, and never have to input a password. And then it sort of dawned on them that, hey, I'm not asked for a password here either, because our apps are all federated with Azure single sign-on. So because we deployed to the World of Hyatt app, the next app they signed into leveraged that same credential and that same key, and they didn't have to sign in there either. And it really amazed us, because we often look at it as like the IT nerds, and we look at it that way. We don't really look at it from the lens of the common end user, and it was incredibly well received all across our organization.
And I think that's very important to call out, because my start in the identity industry was rolling out MFA across a dealer network for an auto manufacturer where there was no MFA before, and the customer response was not warm and embracing. So hearing that this is actually being received by the people that are there to do the job, I think is an important part of to consider as we are actually considering how we roll these out inside of different organizations. When we start talking about the considerations, though, there was a couple of things that you wanted to make sure we highlighted as to how you actually considered selling this inside your organization. Do you want to talk a little bit about that strategy and how you pulled together not only the justification, but the reasoning and how to roll this out?
Yeah, so we tackled it on a few different fronts. So one that I kind of talked about was leveraging when you have a new application install or a new application rollout and try to deploy along with that. One of the other things that we did is we work with our vendors who we purchase hardware from, both Lenovo, Dell, and some of the resellers. And we did a system called overboxing, knowing that, again, buying a bunch of keys is not always easy to absorb, but we started including a key with every new piece of hardware purchase. So when the end user gets their laptop, they open up the box, there's a little welcome to Hyatt packet in there, and it talks them through the installation, the setup of the key, how to get it going. We are a Intune and autopilot shop. I don't know how many folks have experience in this room using autopilot deployments, but that was a game changer for us. And I don't want this to devolve into an autopilot session, but the user kind of opens up their laptop, puts the key in, signs in, registers the key, and then they're done. We don't have all those touch points of imaging and everything else that goes with the laptop. And now they've got the key, and they're not signing in, they're not MFAing, they're done. Even if the app requires a second factor, they're signed in from the point of entry into the workstation. And when you build in $50, $60 into the cost of a $1,000, $1,500 laptop, nobody really notices. It kind of becomes a rounding error. Nobody pays attention to says, oh, my laptop's $1,050 instead of $1,000. They just procure the laptop and all the goodies that come along with it. And that's been another way that we've been able to further our key deployment throughout our organization.
Well, and I think that's important because as you talked about it when we got dinner last night, you were talking through, you know, hey, we started off with one app and then we'll look at other apps as they come on board, and that brings on new users. So if you can make this incremental in how you scale and how you deploy, you are removing risks from a small portion of your organization, but making that incremental progress in that vision that you're trying to get to.
Exactly. So what we did, so when I look at like World of Hyatt, for example, I think we deployed, I think my numbers may be off, but right around 6,000 keys, you know, throughout our organization as part of that deployment. We moved to, I know, again, I'm pushing Microsoft a little bit. I'm not trying to, but they rolled out authentication strengths as part of Azure Active Directory recently that allows us to select phishing-resistant MFA as part of the authentication process. And we use Zscaler Private Access as our kind of remote access solution. And we decided that we were going to enforce phishing-resistant MFA into a Zscaler sign-in. So anytime you have back-end access, you're going to want to use phishing-resistant MFA. And that project leveraged us procuring YubiKeys for that. And I believe that was around 12,000 total keys. Then, you know, with the adoption of new hardware purchases, you start to see where it gets going. You know, so now we've got 20,000, 30,000 keys in the environment, but we haven't had to make that one singular purchase of a bunch of keys. And as we start to progress and get new applications, and, you know, we're replacing our CRS, our central reservation system, within the next year or two, we're building in, you know, additional things like, okay, we're going to want to put keys there because that's the kind of the keys to the kingdom. There's our reservation system. We want to start enforcing keys there, and it gets built into that project plan. And you just keep going, and before you know it, you've got keys in everybody's hand.
Yeah, because that is the goal. I mean, if we're talking about, you know, from a security lens, you know, there was the security and the usability side, but if we're talking about the security lens, if we can actually build a plan to remove phishing from your organization, even if it's a multi-year plan, that you've got a strategy that's going to really reduce the biggest risk that most enterprises face, because that's the cheapest attack vector. If I can get your users to be phished and get a credential, I'm in, and that is a foothold to a journey of pain. So let's talk a little bit about how passwordless was adopted inside IT, and what you felt and what your users thought. So you want to explain a little bit about why, you know, we'll dig into the autopilot piece, but why the managed device, the autopilot combination really made it easier for you to onboard users in your organization?
So one of the challenges we have is, you know, we're a large organization and it's decentralized, meaning that a lot of time is spent, you know, imaging machines, getting them out into production, et cetera. And using autopilot, using the FIDO keys, not having passwords, which is an interesting kind of point. We kind of going off on a tangent a little bit, but Hyatt acquired Apple Leisure Group, which is Apple Vacations, Dreams, Secrets. I'm sure you guys have heard of those inclusive resorts, at the tail end of 2020. And we've been on a journey to kind of integrate their systems ever since. And part of that is all their machines are Intune managed, deployed with autopilot, and all their apps are federated into Azure. These users, they don't have a password, period. Well, I mean, they do in the background, but they don't use it for anything. Mm-hmm. They use YubiKeys, and that gets them through their entire user experience, end to end. And now when we go out and we open up these hotels, you don't have to have a task force of people, you know, putting Windows 10 images on machines. They just have a stack of boxes that came from a vendor, and they're ready to go. And you put one on a desk, the user signs in, and it starts deploying. They use a TAP, or temporary access pass, you know, from Microsoft to get into the machine for the first time that expires a few days later. Once they put that TAP in, they register their YubiKey, they get their security tools, they get all their Microsoft Office, et cetera, their Outlook profile configures, and off they go. So all of that normally takes IT people to have to build out that image and support and sign in as the user and do all these things to get the machine ready to go. Those are all taken off the table. So we've really increased our time that it takes, or rather decreased our time it takes to deploy new hotels, to convert hotels, but even taking a lot of the pressure off the hotel IT managers. And those guys, it's ridiculous, and I'm sure in your industries it's kind of the same. They get run around like chickens with their heads cut off. You know, they're going, they got to fix a sign on a reader board, and then they got to go check a point of sale terminal, and then they got to do this, and then plunge a toilet, and God knows what else, you know, they're forced to do over the course of their day, to not have to spend time imaging PCs, to be able to hand someone a machine in the box, and they provision it and get it ready to go all on their own, to be able to reset a machine that's faulty, has been great. And it's really also helped. I don't know if we're talking about it later. I'm going to admit I haven't looked at all the slides. It's also decreased a lot of the MFA fatigue that some of the users get, which also, I don't know if you guys have seen it in your orgs, that's been one of our number one kind of boo-boos is, and you know, you try to get in someone's head, like you're sitting at dinner and you look at your phone and it says approve or deny for an MFA request. You're not at your computer, and they just go, oh, okay, approve. And then you just let some bad guy in. And it happens all the time because people are so used to getting MFA'd all the time from, maybe it's a session of Teams that decided to wake up for no reason at all. And you get MFA'd, or your dog walks past the motion sensor in front of your computer, wakes your computer up, and you get an MFA. But sometimes it's that guy who's trying to break in and they're doing it. And having the key has helped a lot in that perspective too, because those people aren't getting fatigued by having to keep answering MFA requests all the time.
Yeah, and I think that's important, because when we talk about the user experience side of things, you know, being able to remove those interrupts, those other challenges to your day that have nothing to do with what you're doing. You said you're at dinner, you know, you've just acknowledged that request because you just want to go back to what you're doing, and you want to be present with whoever it is you're eating dinner. So there's two things I think we should make sure we call out here as we've discussed. One is you were talking about the impact that this has on the business, but Hyatt had some unique things that I learned about how you actually operate, with the fact that you're a franchise, and so that you're not able, you know, they have the purchasing power on a lot of the refresh of hardware, and you talked a lot about how many hotels that you're opening up, you know, and how often that this process is occurring in a given year. You want to talk a little bit about the scale and the magnitude of the challenge that you're facing here?
Yeah, so Hyatt has been on just this ridiculous growth pattern, you know, over the past, you know, few years, and we have, you know, openings and transitions teams that help with this, but we can't operate at the scale that we want to if we have to send task forces out to hotels to deploy machines or re-image machines. We just can't do it. So to be able to get to production, I guess, rapidly, and be able to get machines from the box to the desk quickly, get them reset and re-imaged quickly, has really, like I said, it's been a game changer for us. It's really revamped the whole way that we open and take over new hotels.
Well, and I think that lays an important foundation as we look at what we got here. You know, so this is actually a slide walking through a bit of the process that Hyatt has deployed. How do you get that machine out there? How do we make it simple, repeatable? Because those that makes it scalable, and that helps remove human error out of the equation. So I think this is an important thing to call out. Is there anything in here that you want to make sure that you highlight for people that might be in a similar situation as you are?
Yeah, you know, I think when you look at kind of this slide and all the steps, and really when we first started looking at this, it seemed like a really daunting kind of task, like how do we get here? And what we kind of learned through the process is that it's easier than you might think. Mm-hmm. And I don't know how to say this generally, but users aren't as stupid as we might think. And they're actually able to get through these steps on their own without having an IT person holding their hand through getting their PC set up. And that's really what's helped us get through a lot of these transitions easier, knowing that, you know, we don't need to kind of be the IT guy from the Saturday Night Live skits, like looking over someone's shoulder, mm-hmm. and getting their PCs up and running. And Microsoft really, I mean, they made it easy to use Autopilot and Intune to get these things out into the field really quickly.
Yeah, well, that's great. So as we kind of look back at lessons learned, and I want to highlight a couple of things that you said today. One is you've got a bunch of users that don't even have a password. You know, that's not a thing here on the slide, but you said you have a whole bunch of users from an acquisition that don't have a password that they're using. Well, you called out conditional access, and I think that is an important part of whatever identity provider you have, is the policy enforcement. If you've rolled out high assurance authentication, you've taken the effort to get phishing-resistant auth deployed, make sure that that's what the users are leading with. If you allow the weakest link to continue to be in that authentication cycle, you've done a bunch of work without actually having changed your security posture. So it's very important that you look at whichever identity provider you're dealing with and make sure you're using the right authentication method there. I look forward to the day that we can actually delete passwords from directories, and we will get there as soon as we get rid of all those thick clients that are running around on Radius and LDAP out there still. But, you know, out of this, are there any of these points that you really want to make sure that we land before we wrap up here today?
Yeah, I think talking about positioning it as a user benefit is kind of like a big deal, because I think one of the things that we struggled with was the visibility, you know, when you put out a new policy, if you will, and that you don't want the user to think, here comes security or here comes these guys and they're going to make my life more difficult. You know, that's sort of kind of the perception, is that anything you do is going to make my job harder or my life harder. And when we position it as hey, you don't have to put your password in, you know, 100 times throughout the day. You're not going to have to reach for your phone and, you know, put a code in. And then they see that in action. I think that's been sort of and word of mouth is sort of like the best news, right? People communicate with each other, and when they say how cool something is or how much easier it is or, oh, this isn't as bad as I thought it was going to be, that's sort of been the biggest takeaway that we've had, is that it's easier to get the user on board when it helps them and they don't look at it as yet another security hindrance or an IT hindrance to do my job.
Excellent. Well, and I think that really covers the major points that we wanted to make sure we highlighted today. You know, and Art, I want to thank you for taking the time to come out and talk with us, tell this story. I know how difficult these deployments can be. We'll definitely be around if anyone has some questions that you want to ask or follow up, and be glad to go from there. But with that, thank you. Thank you all for coming out.
Thank you.
Did I see a question? Yep. All right. Did you consider using Windows Hello? Art, you're not off the hot seat.
Yeah, so we did. And the reason we decided not to use Windows Hello was from a service desk perspective. We thought it would be challenging for our service desk to kind of know. We wanted to limit their authentication possibilities and trying to figure out what they're using as they call in was going to cause more friction. Like, okay, so I can't get in. Was it because of your password? Is it because Windows Hello is not working? Is it because the fingerprint sensor is not working? Whatever. We wanted to take as much variance out of that authentication process as we could. So we tried to kind of really focus on one thing. That way, when they do call in and say, I can't get in, we're not going down a rabbit hole with them and trying to figure out what the issue is.
Yeah? How are you managing that many keys?
So, are you talking from a deployment perspective, or?
Let's say day-to-day usage. How do we keep track of them?
Well, they're all self-service, so we don't really keep track of the keys themselves. When we kind of deploy them two different ways. So when we go out to a hotel, a certain amount of keys is procured for, whether it's a project, and say we get 100 keys and that goes to this hotel, and they're told, and they have 75 people. I'm just making up numbers, but they'll have 75 that they use. They do 25 on site just as a cost of doing business. You know, people lose keys all the time. And then for more of the knowledge workers, we partnered with a vendor. You know, we're a hotel company, we're not FedEx, so we're not very good at shipping things around. So we partnered with a vendor who warehouses the keys for us, and we have a ServiceNow process built. We use ServiceNow as our ticketing system, so if somebody needs a key, whether they want one as part of a deployment, like when I talked about ZPA, which is our VPN solution. You know, that's people all over the world, and how do we get keys to them? They filled out a ServiceNow form and they request a key, and one of our ServiceNow magicians was able to look and see. You know, he said, I think they're able to request up to 3 times. So if they lose a key, they can request another one. But we don't. It's not, you know, sky's the limit. They can't go in the portal and request 100 keys, one right after the other. They can only get 3. So that's sort of how we've been managing the logistics. And then beyond that, we haven't had a point where someone has lost their keys more than 3 times, but I'm sure it'll happen eventually. We'll maybe cross that bridge when we get to it, I think. But that's sort of how we've handled the deployment.
How about to revoke one?
To revoke a key?
Yes, now they say the guy who loses his keys here at Vegas. Now how do you revoke it?
We don't revoke keys. So if somebody loses a key, we don't revoke one. There is a process that they can go in the Azure portal and remove the key and add another one. But we know that the key is tied to the identity. So it's not that they can use it. If somebody picked it up, they're not going to be able to just use it. So we don't. It's not an oath token. So we don't really bother too much with revoking the keys once they've been issued.
Cool. Any other questions? Oh yeah, over there.
Quick question. You talked about like the process or training that you did for your users. So that's something that like Hyatt created their own training for registering the device, or did
Yes.
Yubico work with
Yeah, we did. We worked with our service desk, and they created training materials, videos, multilingual videos, and just Word documents that talk through how to register a key.
Yep. And I'll say that at Yubico, we do have some professional services where we can offer help in really handling that OCM side of things, all the change management, the notification, what are the processes that you need to look at. Because when you're moving from a password system where we've had 30 years of maturing password resets, and you start going passwordless and it's device-based, there are things that you're going to have to consider that you may not have. And so that's what that services package is all about, helping you figure out what's going to break before the user tells you. Sure.
So you mentioned people lose their keys. So when you issue a new one, brand new one, how you reestablish the identity? How you actually the recovery?
So you get into the our registration, which we use Azure, and it's in it's got that guardrail that you have to MFA before you can register MFA, which is a good thing, right? If you have especially a passwordless environment. That's what the Microsoft tab is for, and I'm very Microsoft centric, so I know there's other identity providers, but I can just tell you from my own experience. So the tab satisfies both the first and second factor. So when someone loses a key, needs another one, they work with their local IT manager at the hotel or our service desk. The service desk will issue them a tab. They use that tab.
So you use the same processes
As
Refresh.
deployment is used for refresh, exactly.
Yep. Great. Over here.
And are you guys using pins with the keys at all, especially for like internal IT usage, or it's just strictly can we associate an identity with the key and just plug in the key?
It's presence and pin.
So the keys you're using is
Yeah, with the PIN. So it's both of those things. When you look at the passwordless implementation that Microsoft has done, all of their authentications are passwordless multi-factor. When a YubiKey is involved, it requires that what's called user verification to unlock the authenticator, and then it will actually do the signature process. Cool. All right. Well, unless there's any other questions, thank you.